Good day, everyone. Let me introduce myself first. I'm Mary Luzbel A. Iligorle, and I'm going to discuss all about traditional view of the learning process. Second, changes in views of the learning process. Third, a shift from teaching to learning. And lastly, theories supporting new views of the learning process. Shall we start? Let's have first the traditional view of the learning process. The traditional teaching and learning process, which was practiced way back in 20th century and backwards, can be viewed as a teacher-centered approach that enables the teacher to be the center of instruction, being the only expert and dispenser of knowledge inside the classroom, and the student's role was only to receive the knowledge presented to them. The traditional education paradigm is often characterized by the following views of learning. First, learning is hard. Lots of us viewed learning as difficult and really tiresome. In fact, only few of us enjoyed and loved learning and its process. In traditional education, when having fun in doing learning activities, students are subjected to acquire no learning and just fooling around. Second, learning is based on a deficit model of the students. The educational system focuses more on addressing and finding out the weaknesses of the students and labeling or categorizing students based on their weaknesses, instead on encouraging students to improve and appreciate what are their strengths and develop these strengths. The traditional system strives to fit students into the ideas set by schooling that students must be the best and target on their weaknesses. Third, learning is a process of information transfer and reception. Traditional education is always defined as teacher-centered, right? Wherein teachers are the master of instruction and the only source of knowledge inside the classroom, while the students is a mere passive receiver and storer of information. These present learning as reproducing knowledge rather than letting these students discover and produce their own concepts about ideas. Next, learning is an individual or solitary process. Students tend to spend most of their time working individually and alone on worksheets and tasks given by the teachers on their desk, and this makes learning less meaningful and dull. Students' experiences is extremely important in building meaningful learning, especially when students find activities challenging and engaging. Students will be motivated to think deeper and participate. Fifth, learning is facilitated by breaking content or instruction into small isolated units. Education system focuses more on breaking knowledge into units and teaching it by parts rather than creating linkages with other concepts. This is more practiced in traditional times since it's easier to teach things one at a time that can be easily and timely tested. And lastly, learning is viewed as a linear process. Instructions or lectures and even textbooks provide information in one linear path and bounded content areas, allowing the students to not explore and discover many possible paths that they can find in learning various concepts and ideas. So that would be all for the traditional view of the learning process, which in sum up can be viewed as traditional as teacher-centered approach that is more on limiting in reproducing the same knowledge which are given by the teachers to the students. Let's proceed to the changes in views of the learning process. In contrast to traditional teaching-learning paradigm, a new paradigm of teaching-learning process is emerging that encompasses the following views of the human learning process. First, we have learning is a natural process. It's been primarily taken into consideration that students have different learning styles and process of learning. Students is diverse, and not everyone learns in the same way. There are different learning process and styles of individual students. Giving interesting and rich learning environments and stimulating teachers will make students learn. Second, learning is a social process. Students are noted to learn best in collaboration with peers, teachers, and others when they are actively engaged in a meaningful and interesting task. ICT tools also is a great factor which provides opportunities to students and teachers to have collaborative learning all over the place wherever you are. Especially now in pandemic time, ICT tools plays a big role in collaborative learning. Third, learning is an active and not a passive process. Students must be actively engaged in the learning process to produce knowledge and not merely passive receivers of knowledge, just like the traditional view of the learning process. This contradicts the traditional view of learning process that allows students to move forward towards competence and be actively engaged in learning process, such as solving real-life problems, scientific researches and experiments, and giving hands-on activities and tasks which produces knowledge and experience to students. We also have learning may either be linear or non-linear. The mind may attend to and process many different types of information simultaneously. Cognitive theory and researchers sees learning as a reorganization of knowledge structures. Students can learn by combining or rearranging collections of schema and cognitive maps and create connections between ideas. There are knowledge domains which works best when taught in a linear approach, but not all learning can be possible when done linearly. Fifth, learning is integrative and contextualized. The learners must discover relations among knowledge with the aids of teachers to help them in several ways to be able to make connections and integrative learning or knowledge. Prabram's holistic brain theory find out that information presented globally is more easily assimilated by students than information presented in sequence and units, unlike the traditional learning process. Learners must be encouraged to discover connections and integrate knowledge. Sixth, we also have learning is based on a strength model of students' abilities, interests, and culture. Unlike the traditional system which targets to find out weaknesses of students, in contrast to remedial and standardized concept of instruction, diversity and individual differences are valued, and learning process is designed to build on the strengths and assets of the learners rather than remediating weaknesses. Seventh and lastly, we have learning is assessed through task completion, products, and real problem solving of both individual and group efforts. Rather than simply evaluating students through paper and pencil tests, assessments are done using portfolios of actual performances and work in both collaborative and individual learning tasks. Giving hands-on tasks and letting students to solve problems will help students to involve real-life situations and create more meaningful learning. Since it will not only build creativity among students but also letting them think critically on their own or within a group. The change in views of the learning process centered more on the development of students, unlike the traditional learning process. As we can observe, today's students no longer want to be passive recipients of information in the transfer model of learning. Rather, they want to be active participants in the learning process, and this will most likely result to lifelong learning. which is the main. We are done with change in views of learning process. Let's proceed to the shift from teaching to learning. A shift from teacher-centered instruction to learner-centered instruction is needed to enable students to acquire the new 21st century knowledge and skills. As what you have learned earlier, traditional education is much far from today's education. Let us look at the table. In first column, we have the fundamentals of teaching learning process. So we have classroom activities, teacher role, instructional emphasis, concepts of knowledge, demonstration of success, assessment, and technology used. In the second and third column, we have teacher-centered learning environment and learner-centered environment. From this, we can be able to differentiate the two learning environments and give emphasis to the shifting that's been happening. As technology became part of our life and changes all aspects of society, it is also changing our expectation on what students can do and must learn. In a teacher-centered, it is deducted or interacted to deliver instruction, while in learner-centered, it is interactive, wherein the source of information becomes a two-way process between the learners and the teacher. The role of the teacher also shifts from being the only expert and fact-teller to being the collaborator or facilitator of knowledge. The way assessment is done also shifts from traditional pencil and paper test involving multiple choice, which only requires memorization skills. It shifted to portfolios and performances, giving more emphasis to hands-on activities and tasks, and builds critical thinking of learners. All of these shifts in learning activity only proves that education system is also developing and improving. The importance of teaching learners lifelong skills and knowledge became one of the major aims of today's educational system. We have this next table which shows and compares the changes in teachers' and students' role in a learner-centered environment. We can read the same changes presented earlier, in which the role of the teacher shifts from being the knowledge transmitter or expert and the only source of information to being the learning facilitator, collaborator, mentor, and even co-learner in a learner-centered environment. The student's role from being the passive recipient of information and reproduced knowledge to being active participant and producer of knowledge in a learning process. These changes in role does not diminish the importance of teachers in a learning process, but it only shows that students are given more freedom and opportunities to acquire knowledge and skills for their own learning. These shifts was also greatly affected on how ICT tools provide support in the learning process. More importantly, now that the new kind of teaching learning process is emerging and used because of the current pandemic. Let's move on to our last topic, which is the theories supporting the new view of the learning process. The new views of the learning process and the shift to student-centered learning have emerged based on cognitive learning research and the influence of several theories that have informed our understanding of the nature and context of learning. Let us look in the image, which shows how learner is being viewed in a learning-centered process. In a constructivism learning environment, students construct their own learning based on prior knowledge and experience, applying this to new contexts and integrating it to pre-existing intellectual constructs. It involves developing learning communities comprised of students, teachers, and experts who are engaged in authentic tasks and authentic contexts. Let's find out first the Vygotsky socio-cultural theory of human learning, which describes learning as a social process and the origination of human intelligence in society or culture. He believed everything is learned on two levels. First, through interaction with others, and second, integrating the knowledge in individuals' mental structure. For example, a learner may acquire knowledge while interacting to people. This knowledge that he acquired from others will be integrated to the learner's mental structure, and that's how learning process takes place. A second aspect of Vygotsky's theory is the idea that potential for cognitive development is limited to a zone of proximal development or ZPD. This zone is the area of exploration for which the student is cognitively prepared but requires help and social interaction to fully develop. Now let's proceed to another theory by John Piaget's cognitive development theory. John claimed that existing cognitive structures of the learner determined how new information is perceived and processed. Just like what you see in the illustration on the side, Piaget's stages of development are part of a theory about the phases of normal intellectual development from infancy to adulthood. This includes thought, judgment, and knowledge. And although he said that not everyone followed the standard age set in each phase, he insisted that cognitive development always followed this sequence. Another concept of Piaget about the cognitive process involved these stages. First, we have the schemas, which are essentially building blocks of knowledge. These are the type of knowledge which is considered as pre-existing, followed by assimilation, which works in interpreting new situation or object based from existing schemas. Next is accommodation, wherein an individual change or create a new schema to fit new information that's been learned. And last stage is equilibrium, when you're able to use assimilation to fill in most of the new information you learned and not constantly adding new schema. And that's how Piaget explained the cognitive development and the thought process. Next theory is by Jerome Bruner, which he emphasized that learning is an active process in which learners construct new ideas or concepts based upon their prior knowledge and experience. He identified 3 principles to guide the development of instruction. First, readiness. Instruction must be concerned with the experiences and context that make students' willingness to learn. Second, spiral organization. Instruction must be structured so that student can easily grasp it. And third, going beyond the information given, in which instruction should be designed to facilitate extrapolation or fill in the gaps of learning. Another theory is the problem-based learning, which aims to develop the learner's higher-order thinking skills by providing students with authentic and complex problems and cases. Through the process of collaboration, articulating theories, creating hypotheses, and critically discussing the ideas of others, students move to a deeper level of understanding of the problem. This helps students create lifelong learning in the process. We also have anchored instruction, an approach to designing instruction that is anchored in a real-world context, problem, or solution. Technology has been used to help create real-world contexts and situations, and like before, without technology, students cannot visualize lots of contents being taught by the teacher, but with the use of technology tools such as projector, LCD, and television, presenting images and videos are normalized as part of teaching. Next, we have distributed cognition, which emphasizes that cognitive growth is fostered through interaction with others and involves dialogue and discourse, developing shared understanding. As what I've said earlier, through interaction with others, we were able to learn different contexts and absorb it in our mental structure. We are almost done. Let's proceed to cognitive flexibility theory, which asserts that people acquire knowledge in ill-structured domains by constructing multiple representations and linkages among knowledge units. It also notes that learners revisit the same concept and principles in a variety of concepts. That's why in today's education, integrative learning is more practiced when developing curriculum and instruction. In cognitive apprenticeship, instructional process in which teachers, more experienced or knowledgeable peers, provide scaffolds to support learners' cognitive growth and development. Just like in other theories of learning, social interaction plays a major role in learning, and students need support for others to learn. And last but not the least, we have self-regulated learning, wherein learners are those who are aware of their own knowledge and understandings. It combines self-observation, self-judgment, and self-reaction. Students are well aware in their own development and growth and how they process learning. All of these theories undergird the new views of the learning process and help shape the new pedagogies for learning. Ultimately, the power of ICTs create rich and new and engaging learning environments for students. I guess that would be all for my presentation. Thank you for listening and have a great day. Thank you.